Hello and welcome to the Knowing Show. I am your host, Christene Marie. We are talking about the question of what do you believe? And there are so many ramifications for this question because it touches every single area of our life. And so often it touches these areas of our life without us even realizing it. When I think about the definition of emotional intelligence, it is the ability to be aware of, understand, control, and express one's own emotions. And it's the ability to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and with empathy. And so, as I think about employing that concept to this whole question of what do you believe, the very first part is to be aware. What are the guiding principles in my life? What are the guiding forces? And it's so interesting. I had this experience with an employee a couple months ago, and we had this momentary impasse. And what I realized in that moment was that we both fundamentally had different belief systems around giving feedback and receiving feedback. And it was something so small, and we ended up having such an amazing conversation because of it. But what I realized is that our past experiences so keenly shape our beliefs about other people, about ourselves, that it causes our defenses to go up without the other person even realizing that that's happening. And so in that moment, we both realized that we had completely different narratives and belief systems around the process of giving feedback. And there's something where it's like, well, of course you're going to give feedback in your job, but cultures interact with feedback very, very differently. I actually lost an amazing employee out of the Philippines about 2 years ago because she didn't want to engage in the discomfort of feedback. And so we get to know the different cultures and glean respect and honor for how do I engage with how different people interact with different cultural understandings, but also different personal experiences. I engage with feedback very differently than even my own sister because I've had a different personal experience than she has. And so when we look at it, it's far deeper and perhaps even more intricate than just cultural alone. It's so down to the individual. And so in order for us to be able to show up well to our jobs, to our families, to our friends, to our partners, it's so important that we come to know ourselves, that we've done the work to be aware of our current and internal belief systems because they are the ones driving our external decisions. But before we dive deeper into this topic, I just want to jump over into the chat. Brian, I'm so glad to see you. I'm sorry I kept you waiting. I ended up pulling off and just sat there literally moon gazing, and then I lost track of time and then had to run back to my computer to go live on the show. For those of you who are near a window, go peek outside because it's the fullest, brightest moon. Have you guys thought about this? I haven't thought about it lately, so this is just a good reminder for me. It is so cool that no matter where we all are in the world, we're seeing the same moon, same stars. It's magical in some ways, that we're all so connected because we all feel very far apart a lot of the time. But that was just a fun little moment to realize that just now. So this whole question of our belief systems, the way that I really like to think about it is, looking at it from the perspective of we've got our soul, which is where our emotions live. That's where our emotional intelligence comes into play. We've got our mind, our intellect. We've got our spirit, and then we've got our physical self. And so the way that I kind of want to look at this is actually in a tertiary perspective, let's say. So let's look at it from the soul, our emotions, our spirit, and then our physical self. So we're kind of tying in the mind with that. So we've got our soul, spirit, and self. And the way that I think of the spirit, it's kind of that vertical connection to God, to our creator, to the divine. That is our pathway to hear his voice, to don the lens that is to look at the world through his eyes and to see other people, to love other people the way that he would. So that's the spirit, that's the vertical. And then if you look at it in the other axis, it would be the horizontal, and it would be the self. And that's very much so like the tether to the world, the physical world. So we've got our divine tether vertical, and we've got our horizontal tether through the self, and that's the physical. And then you've got this z-axis coming in, and it kind of the intersection of the self and the spirit is the soul. And it's kind of that inner world that binds both the horizontal and vertical together. And, I was on a call with a friend just actually yesterday morning, and he was telling me about his framework of you've got to go inward and then upward and then outward. And I was listening and I was like, oh my gosh, like I love that. And it's so much what we talk about with the integration of the soul, spirit, and self. And so the spirit is really the vertical. And so there's something around this concept around knowing and taking time to be aware of what are my beliefs in each one of these axes, the y-axis, x-axis, and z-axis, because each one plays an incredibly important part in the way that our brain then makes the final decision. So much, it's like the brain and the mind so often is kind of the only thing we're conscious of, but there's this whole sub-level that's like subterranean that we're not privy to. It's like we only see the tip of the iceberg, and that's usually the thought that crosses our mind. And we're like, wait a second, where did that thought come from? And then when you trace the thought, all of a sudden you go down and you see all these layers, and it's this whole underground city. It's like finding this, it's insane with the pyramids, what we're finding underneath the ground. There's this whole ecosystem, this whole city. And that's so often what we come to experience with ourselves when we actually do the work to go inward and look underneath what's going on. There's this whole world underneath that can't really, it's not even that it can't be explained, it's yet to be explored. And so with each pursuit of and the exploration to ask this question of, well, what do I believe? Taking a thought, almost like taking it captive and examining it and pulling the thought out of our mind and examining it with curiosity and saying, why do I believe that? And then recognizing that the why is going to take us back to a genesis, origin story. Every thought has an origin story. Every thought has an emotion tied to it and an experience tied to it. And usually that hasn't been brought to us being aware, us being conscious and really aware of what's going on. That's why the very first step to emotional intelligence is to be aware. And so with the passing thought, the goal is to kind of grab it out of thin air and be like, okay, wait a second. Why am I thinking this way? And as we start grabbing these thoughts and looking at them and examining them and asking why of them, then we come to realize, man, there is so much more here than I ever thought. And it's tied to this past story, this origin story with an emotion and an experience wrapped up inside of that story. And the more we become aware, the more we can then recognize, is this now that I'm aware, is this belief actually in accordance with who I want to be after all? Because us recognizing the origin story is simply becoming aware of the past. And then understanding how that shows up today in the present is really just being aware of, okay, this is the status quo. This is my baseline. I had a call with Dr. Jeff Spencer. He was the performance coach for Lance Armstrong. And he had me do this exercise where effectively he called it my GPS, my goal positioning statement, which is like, okay, where am I starting from right now? Because I cannot look ahead and create something new until I have done the work to acknowledge where I'm starting from. And so this work, taking time to be aware, is so much of looking at the past, examining how it shows up today in the present moment. And then we get to design, and then we get to create. What do I want instead? What do I want in its place? What do I want to create? And that's really what it means to exist as kind of co-creator with the greatest creator. But what we choose to believe, that's why that word is in there. It's not just what do you believe, but it's what do you choose? Because our choice, our power of choice has everything to do with this. So if we have clarity on, well, this is who I want to become, what are the belief systems that are necessary to get me to that place? I had this moment as I was telling Brian, I was moon gazing, and I just had this moment where I was like, you know what, there's really some elements of my life that I don't like how I'm living right now. I haven't, and I'll just, it's weird to share, but I'll just be honest. I haven't been working out very much, and I actually really, really miss that. There's something about just exercising and the movement of it that I know it strengthens your mental health, your physical health. Even just spiritual health. I love like listening to music and praising while I work out. And so I haven't been doing that. And I was thinking about this afternoon and really just this evening, that I'm not right now living in accordance with who I want to be. And frankly, I know that my own ideal person of who I can be, I need to change some of the core beliefs that I have around my schedule. And so guys, when we're talking about what do you believe and what are you choosing, it has to be it's very dimensional, as we're talking about kind of the spirit, the soul, and the self coming together. And it's like, okay, how am I going to align my life to be aware of who do I want to be that encompasses all of that? But then how do I align my habits to get me on the right track in each one of these regards? Because we're going to be strong in different areas. I might be really, really strong, or you might be really, really strong in your habit stack going to the gym, whereas I'm working on that right now. But then maybe somebody else is going to be stronger in kind of the spiritual side, where, man, they're just really, really good at the meditation or the prayer and diving into their journal and sharing maybe on the emotional level too. So we're going to find ourselves in different seasons weaker in other areas than others. And so then the question is, how do we recognize my current belief system is actually off base because my habits and my actions are not in alignment? So it's knowing, where do I want to go? What's my ideal? And then how am I living today? And then what needs to change at the core level? Because if I want to change an action, usually I have to change a belief. And so I know that for me, my belief right now, honestly, it's been very limiting, where I have to have a certain environment to do my workouts. And I have to have like the timeline of the day situated in such a way. And so, and here's one other thing, even as I share this, and y'all, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. I've been finding that what I've been telling myself has been the thing that's been true. And I've actually been saying, I wrote a post about this a couple weeks ago, but I've been kind of continuously sharing it and like speaking it out loud. I feel like I've been in the deep end on my tiptoes, and like just barely not drowning with work and just life in general. And I'm so grateful for so many wonderful opportunities. But what I found is that the more I've been saying that out loud, the more it's been kind of becoming more of a reality, rather than like I'm actually actively hiring 4 people. So that shouldn't be true for much longer. But the more I've been saying it out loud, the more I've actually been kind of forming a belief around it and even attaching my identity to it. I've actually kind of liked having a little bit of an excuse of I'm drowning. And it's subconscious. It's very, very quiet. But y'all, when we start saying something repeatedly, we begin attaching and assigning an identity to it. So what we choose to believe, it really is a choice. If I want to hold myself to a high standard of excellence, which I do, then the words I speak out need to actually be aligning with that. So yes, I need to acknowledge, okay, I'm struggling right now. Let me go hire some people. And on the other side of it, man, I'm so excited for getting everyone onboarded. I'm so excited for the level of excellence that we're going to bring for our clients, the level of excellence I'm going to be able to bring to even my family, because I'll have more free time. So I'm just, kind of painting the picture of, we've got the beliefs that are powering us forward, informing the actions we take based on our future ideal. And the words that come out are kind of like the in-between between the belief and the action. The words, man, it's funny. I was reading a book called James, and it was talking all about the power of the tongue. And literally, like, it likens a massive ship, your body, likens your body to a massive ship. And like your tongue is like the little rudder that steers the whole boat. And it's insane. It's so true. Our words have so much power. We've got the power to speak life to people, or to speak death, to spread rumors and lies, or to speak life and love to people. It's wild. We can walk by somebody and just give them a compliment or greet them, and I've seen people's eyes light up because otherwise life can be just so lonely sometimes. But we have the power with our words, with the beliefs that are inside of us being spoken out loud to usher in life, not just for ourselves, but to everyone around us. And y'all, there's an analysis here when we were just talking about like having that thought cross your mind. Well, take it captive, look at it. Because more often than not, if you want to know what you've been talking about, what have you been thinking about? Because they're so connected. And what we think about will eventually be what we talk about, and thus how we act out. And all of that is based in a belief system. And the belief system can be interchanging. It's not like a core belief that has dictated your whole life, but maybe it's just like I just realized today, I really, really want to strengthen and kind of change my belief system around just physical health right now. I've got some opportunities to strengthen that. And so again, it's not some deeply rooted belief. Maybe it is, though, as I kind of do some work and dig in there, maybe I will find more roots. But James Allen wrote this book called As a Man Thinketh. Absolutely brilliant book. He likens the mind to a garden, and he likens every thought to a plant. So if we want to uproot that plant or that weed, let's say, if we want to uproot it, we need to make sure that we get all the weeds there. So that thought underneath goes down into the soil, and that's the belief. That's where the core belief system, it's like the operating system of a business. Your beliefs are the operating system of you and me, and they inform the spirit, soul, and self. And the way that we show up in the world is 1000% predicated on a belief system. And so often that belief system, the seeds were sown that caused this garden to grow by other people. So we've got a belief system of maybe how your father interacted with his father and talked about his dad, and that sowed a seed. Maybe it was watching your mother talk about her relationship with her body. Maybe it was the way that you had friends tease you at school when you messed up at the baseball game. That was a seed. There are seeds sown across every level of analysis for each experience that we have as children and into adulthood. But really, those childhood seeds are important to realize and to consider. And again, that first step is simply to be aware. Because once we're aware, we can take that thought and examine it and say, am I actually on track with where I want to go based on who I want to be? So like Dr. Jeff Spencer advised, creating that baseline, taking it and assigning categories of, okay, my emotional intelligence, my soul, what are my belief systems there that guide the way that I show up in relationships, romantically, friendship-wise, in business, as an employer, as an employee? How am I engaging with those around me based on my belief systems about my emotions and relationships? What does health look like? What even are my own metrics of success? And so then we move on to the mind, the physical self, the mind. And like, what is your current belief system around your mind? And maybe we've got some limiting beliefs. Maybe we've actually stunted our own ability to make an impact in the world. And so, and asking those questions, what are my current belief systems? And take a look at the thoughts you hold that go through your mind around the intellect. And one of the best ways to know your belief systems is to consider, what do you judge people for? Where are you judging others? Because that can show your real values. And then next, your physical body. So much of our own standard for what we want to achieve with our physical body, with health, it comes from everybody else. Like, culture has been sowing seeds in the garden of our mind regarding physical appearance. 1000%. Every magazine, every podcast, every highlight reel on social. I had only until 2 years ago did I actually think, well, what do I actually want to even myself to look like? Like, if I was going to choose, what would that be? Because it had just always been measuring against someone else's standard. Then and this is where our beliefs cross over. That it's not just isolated into the physical, because looking at the spiritual. Well, if part of my belief system is that I am wonderfully made and designed, that I am chosen and loved, well, then do I treat my physical body that way? Do I actually hold a reverence for the fact that, man, this physical body is a vessel, it's a vehicle, it's a place where God dwells. How freaking cool is that? So do I honor my physical body? And then if that's true, and then this is true, okay, well then how do I show up in relationships? Do I honor and treat as sacred my partner, my children? But I'm not going to treat other people sacred if I'm not treating myself that way, because I don't view myself that way in terms of the spirit. So every single one of our belief systems in one particular category 1000% impact the others. This is why it's the garden of our mind. It's all the seeds are playing in the same bed together. They're not in segmented regions of ourselves. And this is where I think that there's a lot of misconception, is that we operate in silos. It's, on Sundays I go to this, my religious place, whether that's church or even a lot of times have their own little like prayer closet. They'll go and do the spiritual act of worship or prayer in isolation or in private, or they go to some physical place and then they leave that physical place and then they act completely different. And then we see the same thing. People show up at work and then they go home and then they show up very differently. So the reality is that, man, if we were to live as integrated, holistic beings, people, where we know who we are, we know whose we are, and we know why we are, the answer to those three questions could very well be three of the most critical ones of our lives. And then the way that we interact with the world around us is a direct result and reflection of how our belief systems are formed. Are we aware of them? Have we cultivated them in each one of those categories: emotional, spiritual, physical, and intellectual? Oh, Christopher Adams, I'm just so glad you're here. It's written that if we harbor a sinful thought like anger or lust, etc., we're just as guilty as someone who acts on those thoughts. God judges the heart because it shows our intention toward our neighbor. That's so, so, so well said. It is really, and then you say, as a man thinks, so he is. It's so, so true. Y'all, we're never going to be able to escape from that which is within us coming out. There's this biblical concept of you shall know a tree by its fruit. So what's the fruit in our lives? Well, I'm seeing some fruit in my life that I don't like, just being completely honest. And I told my darling that today. I was like, I really, really don't like how I'm not honoring health right now. And I can feel it. Like I can feel the physical ramifications of just not honoring that. I just, today it was like 5:00 and I just felt my eyelids being so heavy. And I just feel like I'm on the verge of getting sick a lot of the time, but I'm not doing the work to tend to my body to make sure that I'm living and pursuing health. I'm much more living reactively. And so that's the fruit. I'm having the fruit of that. And so to this point, Christopher Adams, you said St. Paul asked that question to Timothy. Did you know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit? It's a call to honor your body the same as you would your mind and spirit. Y'all, it's bringing balance. Andrew, I love this, to have a balanced life. Y'all, it's so interesting. We have the power to choose. We really, really do. And we're given a guidebook in so many ways. And I'm just so grateful for those of you who showed up in the community here, because us being able to learn from each other, and getting the reminders of what's true and being reminded that we're not alone. It can feel really lonely, this journey of life. So many times it can feel lonely. And so it's a blessing to be able to come alongside each other and even just ask, hey, what are you doing? What are you working on? What are you pursuing? What does growth look like for you today? And then being able to kind of go from there. So Andrew says we have to keep ourselves healthy because God requests that. I love that perspective. It's so true. Just scrolling. Ryan Cox, I'm glad to see you. Kartik, hello. Thanks for joining. Kartik says, where are you from? I am from Maryland, actually. I grew up in Maryland, and I have a place outside of DC. I'm like I guess a 10-mile, I've biked to Georgetown. So 10 miles from Georgetown. But anyways, thank you all so much for joining. I will be back on again tomorrow. I've been in with this whole conversation around health and kind of examining that. I haven't been so much on a routine, so I'm hoping to get back on a routine to an extent. I'm going to be traveling for like 6 weeks. So I think my routine needs to just be kind of like within containers of time. So we'll see how that goes. But I'm glad to see you. It's been a while. I'm glad you're here. Brian says, you just got to believe a little harder. That's when it stops. That's when it starts feeling like you're just grinding out a religion and starts feeling amazing. Wyatt, hello. Thanks for joining. Guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. I'm so glad to see you. I love this. I'll end with Christopher Adams' comment here. In a time you feel buried underground, shift your mind towards realizing that you're actually a seed being planted. God is the gardener that waters you daily. Beautiful. Beautiful. Brian, good night, my friend. Y'all, thank you so much for joining. I will see you tomorrow, and I'll schedule the show as soon as I know my schedule. Talk soon.